What once seemed beyond the bounds of political possibility has now erupted into a brutal reality for Sir Keir Starmer. The man long hailed as Labour's steady hand and modernising force now finds himself at the centre of what many are calling one of the most catastrophic collapses in recent British political history. A by-election once expected to be a routine Labour victory has instead unleashed a political earthquake. It took just 25 votes, barely a whisper in electoral terms, for Reform UK to prize away the long-held Labour stronghold of Runcorn and Helsby. In that narrow defeat lay a seismic shift. The constituency had been a Labour bastion for generations. Party insiders were confident, even complacent. Reform UK, they insisted, posed no serious threat. But on the ground, signs of discontent were everywhere. Campaign volunteers reported cold receptions at the doorsteps. Traditional Labour households fell disturbingly silent. What was initially dismissed as voter fatigue was, in truth, a simmering rebellion. Quiet. Deep-rooted. Smouldering. Did you know that over 95% of our viewers aren't subscribed to the channel? We totally get it, life gets busy, and sometimes it's easy to forget. But here's the thing, subscribing is completely free, and it really helps us keep creating the content you enjoy. So, why not hit that subscribe button and join our community? It only takes a second, but it makes a world of difference to us. Thank you for your support. And when the result came through, the unthinkable happened. Nigel Farage's Reform UK clinched the seat by the slimmest of margins. Yet the political implications were anything but small. According to senior sources, Sir Keir Starmer was visibly shaken behind closed doors. Some insiders even claimed he broke down in tears upon hearing the result. But the immediate loss wasn't the only disaster. Rumours quickly spread that several Labour MPs were preparing to defect, some within hours. In the space of a single night, Starmer's once ironclad grip on the party appeared to disintegrate. The image he had carefully cultivated, of calm, competence and control, lay in tatters. This was no mere loss of votes. It was the erosion of Labour's political identity. Panic swept through the party. Labour HQ descended into disarray. Phone lines rang endlessly. Advisers scrambled to draft statements, to spin the narrative, to contain the fallout, but it was already too late. The media seized on the story, and within minutes it dominated headlines across the country. Reform UK, once regarded as a fringe force, had stormed the Labour citadel. Then came the second devastating blow. Labour MPs began resigning, not in quiet, discreet letters, but in dramatic public statements and live interviews. One MP, speaking candidly on national television, declared, "I can no longer stand by and watch Labour abandon the very people it once claimed to fight for," before announcing their defection to Reform UK. Then another followed. And another. What had begun as whispers turned rapidly into an exodus. Starmer's leadership was no longer merely under threat. It faced open rebellion. But this was not an overnight implosion. It had been years in the making. Labour's traditional base, working-class communities, pensioners, young families, had grown disillusioned. They watched as energy bills soared, wages stagnated, and NHS waiting times stretched into absurdity. Meanwhile, party leaders spoke of grown-up politics but failed to engage with the suffering felt in daily life. Reform UK didn't rely on glitzy campaigns or glossy media coverage. They listened. They spoke about the issues Labour had grown too cautious, or too afraid, to address: immigration, crime, national identity. Their message was stark, but it resonated. We hear you. We are not them. Inside Labour, the mood turned from fear to fury. Local organisers pointed fingers at Starmer's inner circle, accusing them of ignoring early warnings. Some even claimed that grassroots concerns were actively suppressed to preserve the image of an orderly leadership. Reports began to emerge of emotional breakdowns in private. Emergency meetings were convened. Leaked memos appeared online. Media blackout strategies were enacted, futile efforts to contain a story already spinning out of control. Reform UK's victory was now trending across social media platforms. The stream of defections grew. Starmer's authority was visibly crumbling. Demands for a leadership challenge intensified. Some MPs began pushing for an emergency general election. Behind closed doors, a single word began to echo, not defeat, but extinction. Even Labour's most loyal supporters were beginning to look elsewhere. "I voted Labour all my life," said one Runcorn resident. "But this time, I went with Reform. They are the only ones who actually talk like real people." That sentiment echoed across communities once thought to be Labour's unshakable bedrock. It wasn't just a few isolated voices, it was a widespread shift in allegiance. By the following morning, Keir Starmer was nowhere to be seen. National headlines screamed, "Collapse." Tabloid front pages displayed images of a weary Starmer, head in hands, encapsulating the despair of a party in freefall. Political commentators quickly drew comparisons to the dark days of Michael Foot, a time when Labour drifted towards the political wilderness. But this moment wasn't simply about one by-election or a faltering leader. It signaled something deeper, a party that has lost touch with its people, and a new political movement rising to fill the vacuum. The implications are profound. What began as a tremor in Runcorn and Helsby has erupted into a full-blown political landslide. Labour MPs, long bound by party loyalty or restrained by fear, now saw the writing on the wall. As more began to cross the floor, it became clear that this was no fleeting protest. This was a coordinated rebellion. For decades, Labour believed its red wall heartlands were immovable, solid. But the voters had moved on. Now, amid the rubble, Reform UK was surging forward. And the Labour Party, its future uncertain, its leadership fractured, its loyal base slipping into history, stood on the precipice of political oblivion. What began as a single electoral defeat has morphed into a crisis of identity, one that threatens to unravel the very fabric of the party. Keir Starmer, once regarded as a steadying hand in turbulent times, now finds himself presiding over what may be the terminal decline of a party that once defined the British left. The shock victory by Reform UK in Runcorn and Helsby was more than just an electoral upset. It was the match that lit the fuse on an internal Labour mutiny, one that had been quietly smouldering for months, if not years. Now, that revolt has burst into the open, and the damage may be irreversible. This is no longer about fringe backbenchers or disillusioned activists. Veteran Labour MPs, individuals who have campaigned under the party's banner for decades, are denouncing Starmer's leadership in public and accusing him of abandoning Labour's working-class roots. Their defections to Reform UK, a party once dismissed as little more than populist bluster, have transformed what was a leadership question into a full-scale political uprising. For months, Starmer had managed to keep internal dissent suppressed. MPs were privately warned not to criticise the leadership, to remain united, and to avoid giving the press any hint of internal strife. But the by-election defeat shattered that fragile facade. Those who had once grumbled behind closed doors were now speaking openly, forcefully. Some MPs revealed they had been threatened or silenced for raising legitimate concerns. Others described the Labour leadership as increasingly insular, arrogant, and out of touch with life outside the Westminster bubble. And the more Starmer attempted to impose control, the more power slipped through his fingers. With resignations piling up, Labour HQ scrambled to contain the fallout. Staffers were ordered to plug leaks, but it was already too late. Screenshots of internal WhatsApp messages, voice notes from furious MPs, and damning campaign emails began circulating on social media. For the first time, the British public could witness the internal collapse of a major political party in real time. What they saw was chaos, infighting, betrayal, desperation. Gone was the image of unity and discipline. In its place stood a wounded institution, bleeding credibility and cohesion with every passing hour. Each defection was not just a political act, it was a public spectacle. MPs delivered damning indictments of the party in emotional farewell statements broadcast live. They spoke not just of personal betrayal, but of the betrayal of the electorate. One MP tearfully admitted she could no longer face her constituents, declaring that Labour had become just another arm of the political elite. But these MPs weren't simply walking away, they were walking straight into the arms of Reform UK. A move once thought inconceivable had become the new normal. Nigel Farage, ever the political showman, seized the moment. At a press conference flanked by his new recruits, he didn't need to gloat. The imagery spoke volumes. Reform UK was no longer a fringe pressure group. It was building a serious political coalition, defector by defector. Labour looked shattered. Reform looked ascendant. And the public response was immediate. Reform UK's polling numbers soared. Donations flooded in. Membership applications spiked. Every ounce of that momentum came directly at Labour's expense. Sir Keir Starmer's response was muted, an uneasy, visibly shaken press appearance in which he clung to familiar talking points about staying the course. But no one was listening, not the voters, not the media, and increasingly, not even his own party. Behind the scenes, senior Labour figures were already convening informal discussions about a succession plan. Could Angela Rayner emerge as a unifying figure? Would Yvette Cooper launch a challenge? The conversation had shifted. The question was no longer whether Labour needed change, it was whether the party could even survive until the next general election. Even more troubling for Starmer was what the defectors were planning next. According to reliable sources, they were coordinating the creation of a formal Reform UK parliamentary bloc, a faction of ex-Labour MPs actively working to bring more of their colleagues across. Several sitting MPs were reportedly on the brink, waiting to gauge public reaction before declaring their own defection. If even a handful followed, Labour would move from crisis into catastrophic freefall. Then came the bombshell. A senior member of the shadow cabinet was discovered to be in secret talks with Reform UK. The story broke late in the evening, but it spread like wildfire. If confirmed, it would signal the collapse of Starmer's inner circle, the final fracture of his authority. The leader once praised for his calm and steady hand now looked utterly hollow. His command had evaporated. And across the Labour heartlands, a simple question was echoing among voters. If our own MPs are leaving, why should we stay? For years, Labour had painted Reform UK as a dangerous, reactionary threat to democracy. But now, to many disillusioned voters, Reform didn't look like a threat. It looked like an alternative. The traditional scare tactics had failed. This was no longer a battle of left versus right. It had become a question of trust, and Labour had comprehensively lost it. Reform UK was offering something that went beyond policies or party manifestos. They were offering vindication, a reckoning for the betrayal of voters, the neglect of forgotten towns, the ignored working-class communities that had once formed Labour's core. And the British public, long tired of being patronised, were ready to take it. As defections grew and Starmer's closest allies turned on each other, Labour's internal operations descended into outright chaos. The once disciplined, finely tuned political machine had become a battlefield. Advisers traded blame. Strategy meetings devolved into shouting matches. Amid the bedlam, Starmer appeared increasingly isolated, unable to stem the tide. Two of his key strategists had, it later emerged, quietly resigned before the by-election disaster. They had not made a public scene, they didn't need to. Their absence said more than any resignation letter. Leaked statements revealed a bleak internal picture, a leader obsessed with optics over substance, deaf to warnings from those closest to him. "We warned him," said one former aide. "We begged him. He didn't listen." Then came the final humiliation. A leaked audio recording surfaced, reportedly capturing Starmer berating MPs in a closed-door meeting, accusing them of sabotage. The tone was raw, emotional. The controlled, calculated delivery that had once defined his leadership was replaced by a cracking voice, edged with desperation. The image was now painfully clear, not a leader in control, but a man desperately clinging to a crumbling political empire. And with every hour, the question grew louder across Westminster and beyond. Can Labour survive Keir Starmer? Or is Britain witnessing the slow, spectacular demise of a party that no longer knows whom it represents? By the time Labour HQ comprehended the full scale of the crisis, it was far too late. The ship was sinking, and the lifeboats were already getting crowded. One party insider likened the atmosphere to the Titanic, but with more screaming. What had begun as a trickle of defections had erupted into a full-scale party collapse. This was no longer a debate over leadership. It had become a battle for survival, and even that seemed increasingly in doubt. The media, naturally, had a field day. Major newspapers splashed devastating headlines across their front pages. Starmer on the brink. Labour in freefall. Reform UK reshapes British politics. The British public watched on in disbelief as Labour's carefully cultivated image collapsed like a house of cards. Poll after poll showed Reform UK support rising, not only in traditional red wall battlegrounds but across the entire country, in once safe Labour seats now looking perilously vulnerable. The message from voters was blunt. We've had enough. It wasn't just the defections. It wasn't even the by-election disaster. What unfolded in recent weeks was something far deeper, something existential. For years, Labour had promised transformation. It spoke of renewal, of change. But under Keir Starmer, change became yet another buzzword, vague, hollow, and saturated with corporate jargon. The language of lobbyists, not leaders. In stark contrast, Reform UK, for all its rough edges and controversial figures, was offering something brutally simple: honesty. They weren't hiding behind polished slogans or contrived messaging. They were angry. And crucially, so were millions of ordinary Britons. That raw emotional connection, the ability to speak plainly, to articulate rage without shame, was something Labour had long forgotten. Starmer now found himself facing a political terrain for which he was completely unprepared. For the first time, he wasn't respected. He wasn't feared. He was pitied. Each new public appearance looked more desperate than the last. His speeches were mechanical, stuffed with recycled lines. His interviews were riddled with deflection, denial, and a painful detachment from political reality. Even his own MPs were reportedly cringing at his television appearances. The man once hailed as the adult in the room now resembled the face of hollow leadership. Then came another hammer blow. In a string of crucial constituencies, senior Labour councillors defected to Reform UK. They cited betrayal, deep disillusionment, and a total collapse in faith. These weren't symbolic acts of protest. They were structural ruptures. Local party operations began to unravel. Leaflets stopped going to print. Door-knocking campaigns were abandoned. Volunteers resigned en masse. Branch offices fell eerily silent. Labour's once vaunted campaign machinery was breaking down, live, in real time. In a panicked move, Starmer summoned an emergency summit with party officials. But instead of solidarity, he encountered open revolt. Regional directors demanded accountability. Trade union leaders questioned whether Starmer had the authority, or credibility, to lead Labour into a general election. Some began floating a leadership vote, the party's nuclear option. What was once whispered behind closed doors was now broadcast in broad daylight. Party allies, people once firmly in Starmer's corner, began publicly entertaining his downfall. Not in secret. Not off the record. But in live interviews, radio broadcasts, and full-page newspaper columns. Within weeks, Starmer had gone from being seen as a prime minister in waiting to a man clinging to a crumbling throne. Meanwhile, Reform UK was capitalising on the moment. Their message evolved rapidly, from that of an insurgent protest group to something more potent, a replacement party. They were no longer just railing against the system. They were promising to dismantle it. Every new defection, every poll surge, every 1,000 new members brought them closer to legitimacy. What Westminster once mocked as a sideshow was now shaping the political future. As the dust settled after yet another bruising week for Labour, Starmer stood alone. His inner circle had evaporated. His strategic options had run dry. His name had become synonymous with collapse. The man who vowed to rebuild Labour had inadvertently delivered its funeral rites. And the final blow didn't come with drama or fury. It arrived with silence. Constituency offices were shuttered. Major donors went quiet. Even the unions, Labour's historic power base, began to fracture. And then came the poll that confirmed what insiders already feared. For the first time in modern political history, Reform UK overtook Labour in a national survey. It wasn't a fluke. It was a verdict. A country that had once trusted Labour to speak for it now saw only empty platitudes and Westminster spin. Entire communities, places Labour had taken for granted for generations, now waved Reform UK banners. They didn't do so because they had changed. They did so because Labour had. In union halls, bus depots, post offices, and working men's clubs, the refrain was the same. Enough. Enough of the lies. Enough of the backroom deals. Enough of watching proud towns decay while Labour MPs sipped champagne at Westminster receptions. And these weren't extremists. They were mothers, pensioners, lorry drivers, former lifelong Labour voters. They were the heart of Britain, the people Labour once claimed to represent, who had finally reached breaking point. In Reform UK, they didn't just see a protest movement. They saw a lifeline. And as Labour unravelled, Starmer vanished. After a week of rebellion, resignations, and public humiliation, the Labour leader disappeared from public view. Some said he was drafting a resignation speech. Others claimed he was on retreat. But the truth, according to those closest to him, was far simpler. He had lost the will to fight.